The purpose of this analysis is to focus on the invasion game of touch football and the energy systems that interplay throughout the performance of an elite performer in comparison to an amateur. A constant supply of energy is required for a human body to sustain daily processes, including physical activity. ATP, also known as adenosine triphosphate, provides energy for cellular activities. It contains 1 adenosine and 3 phosphate molecules. The ATP-CP system focuses on supplying immediate energy for any short maximal intensity under the duration of 10 seconds. The lactic acid system plays a crucial role in providing quick energy to rebuild ATP during high-intensity repeated efforts. The aerobic energy system is a process that involves oxygen to produce energy. This system is dominant during submaximal prolonged efforts. The human body needs a dynamic interplay of the 3 energy systems to fulfill their energy demands. At any moment, all 3 energy systems are active, and the ratio of systems is based on the intensity and duration of exercise. Midfielders are usually the most consistent and fittest players in their team due to their high involvement and role in creating plays to successfully achieve tries. In touch football, the midfielder player requires a demand for a high-intensity workload. The player in this role needs to effectively utilise all 3 energy systems to execute explosive movements throughout the duration of a game. At the start, Norman is at resting levels, meaning his energy demand is met by oxygen supply. Therefore, he's working predominantly in the aerobic system. As Norman gains pace and makes his first defensive touch of the game, the oxygen demand surpasses the intake, resulting in an oxygen deficit. A shortage develops when the energy requirement exceeds the available oxygen, forcing Norman to rely on the anaerobic systems. Norman primarily utilises his ATP-CP system for his additional energy throughout the early stages of the game, accelerating rapidly to secure his initial defensive touch inside the first 10 seconds. His contribution is 90% ATP-CP, with 5% coming from the lactic acid and aerobic systems. After the initial period of high-intensity exercise, the lactic acid system takes over from the ATP-CP system. This shift occurs when the ATP-CP system begins to deplete due to insufficient recovery for PC resynthesis and limited storage of oxygen and phosphocreatine in the muscles. In the first 25 seconds, Norman works hard on offense, making 3 passes and 1 roll ball. As Norman continues to develop attacking plays, the lactic acid system remains the dominant source of energy due to its quick energy production and ability to execute short, intense efforts. The lactic acid system currently accounts for 65%, followed by the aerobic system at 30% and ATP-CP system at 5%. As the lactic acid system grows dominant over time, Norman develops lactic acid buildup, commonly known as the onset of blood lactate accumulation, also identified as OBLA. The accumulation of lactic acid contributes to his exhaustion and impairs his ability to contract his muscles effectively. OBLA is a point in exercise when blood lactate levels rise, reaching 4 millimoles per litre, signalling a change to a more intense effort. After 1 minute on the field, coaches will look to substitute Norman since he has surpassed his lactate threshold. Norman's intense 1-minute efforts surpass his lactate threshold, causing fatigue from the buildup of metabolic byproducts. As Norman becomes fatigued, metabolic byproducts, notably hydrogen ions and inorganic phosphates, must be removed from the body, especially in the blood. Instead of complete rest, light activities are conducted which improves excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, also termed as EPOC. EPOC contains 2 phases, a lactacid which replenishes CP and lactacid which eliminates lactic acid and replenishes glycogen. Norman's usual recovery period of 2 minutes and 26 seconds allows him to regain around 95% of his depleted phosphocreatine reserves with the usage of up to 4 litres of oxygen for restoration. This recovery time allows him to perform explosively at high intensities with the usage of the ATP-CP system occurring again. During recovery, the aerobic system performs 90% of the effort with lactic acid and ATP-CP accounting for the remaining 5% each. Norman maintains a 1-to-2 work-rest ratio throughout the game, with an average playing time of 1 minute and 21 seconds and a recovery time of 2 minutes and 26 seconds. This ratio is crucial for Norman's ability to meet quick and strong energy demands throughout his performance as a midfielder. In comparison to Peter Norman, Sean Francis plays the wing position. Sean's role as a winger consists of operating off the ball to allow the midfielders to advance the ball down the field. As the game begins, Sean sprints to the ball to get his initial defensive touch. As the intensity of activity increases, the body experiences an oxygen deficit due to a shortage of accessible oxygen to meet energy demands, causing the body to rely on anaerobic pathways. Since Francis's position is submaximal and hence at a lower intensity, his oxygen deficit time is substantially shorter than Norman's. Francis's position is primarily at a lower intensity, which forces the body to quickly revert to the aerobic system as the dominant energy system. While functioning at a submaximal intensity throughout the contest, Francis can exert peak effort. when there is a high intensity demand, he can re-employ anaerobic pathways, specifically his ATP-CP. Throughout the first half, Francis hung wide on the field, working majorly in the aerobic system at a low intensity whilst he hovered. He then accelerated rapidly for a high intensity burst to succeed a try. Francis's body obtained energy from the anaerobic systems, with ATP-CP contributing 50% and lactic acid 30%, while the aerobic system continued to provide 20%. All energy systems played an important role in the interplay, allowing Francis to exert a short, high-intensity effort while recovering fast. The lactic acid system becomes more dominant during the substitutions of the middle players, requiring him to bring the ball up the field more. This was evident at the end of the first half, as he had to make 2 passes showing high-intensity repeated movements. Francis's position on the field is primarily submaximal, allowing him to stay on the field for longer periods than Norman. This is related to the use of passive recovery. As a wing player, he can walk for most of the game while staying in line with the ball to reduce lactic acid buildup and metabolic byproduct accumulation. As Francis leaves the field, the aerobic energy system is the most prevalent energy system in recovery, accounting for 90%, with the ATP, CP, and lactic acid systems contributing 5% each. This is a stage during which the epoch of the body, specifically a lactacid, works hard to repay the oxygen debt by increasing oxygen consumption. As a wing player, there are around 3 players dedicated to this position, compared to Norman being one of 6 midfielders for rotations. Francis, with an average playing time of 5 minutes and 32 seconds and an average recovery of 2 minutes and 9 seconds, spends more time on the field than Norman, with shorter recovery intervals and rotations. Although Norman is on the field for a smaller amount of time, his involvement is significantly higher, evidenced by a total of 67 possessions in the game, compared to Francis with 24. The evidence of involvement and substitutions highlights the roles of players and the impact of utilising energy systems in touch football. As a Year 12 PE class, we played 2 touch games with varying half times based on the time available. We were expected to play one game as a middle and the other as a winger. By playing ourselves, we were able to incorporate our expertise of energy systems. Unfortunately, we only had substitutes for the second game. When playing the middle position, I noticed the interplay of energy systems with a high involvement rate. After the first whistle, my dominant energy system was the ATP-CP system, as I experienced an oxygen deficit. By making multiple efforts with no recovery for PC resynthesis, the contribution of the lactic acid system increased. Due to having no substitutions, I was on the field for 100% of the time compared to Norman's 1-to-2 work-to-rest ratio. Since there was no recovery, my ATP-CP system had no time to recover and the PC reserves were almost depleted. The lactic acid and aerobic systems became the primary suppliers, while the ATP-CP system contributed much less. Because I worked longer than Norman, I exceeded the lactate threshold and produced a large amount of lactic acid, preventing my body from performing at full capacity and limiting my performance. My heart rate data demonstrated my significant involvement throughout the game, working mostly in zones 4 and 5, which is typically above 85% of my maximum heart rate, causing the body to work beyond the oblet and accumulate lactate, causing fatigue in my performance. As I became weary throughout the game, if the ball was on the wing and I was off the ball, I was able to transition back to the aerobic system for a passive recovery. My statistics support my high involvement in the game, with a total of 25 possessions. When I played the wing position, I experienced the game at a maximal intensity for most of the game, in comparison to me playing as the winger at a total of 5 possessions throughout the half, therefore significantly less than when I played as a midfielder. The low intensity can also be seen in the comparison of the heart rate data. The average heart rate as a winger was 78% compared to a midfielder at 83%. By working predominantly at a lower intensity, I worked majorly in the aerobic system and I was able to complete passive recovery throughout the game. Therefore, a shift could be made back to the ATP-CP system from being dominant in the aerobic system for a single maximum effort, specifically when I accelerated to succeed a try. By playing both positions, it was clear that the midfielder has a significantly higher reliance on the lactic acid system for their bursts, due to a minimal recovery time whilst available on the field, whereas the winger relies drastically on the aerobic system, allowing more time for passive recovery. As the winger utilises the passive recovery when on the field, ATP-CP can be used for high intensity bursts when required.